The Great Hall of the Galactic Conglomerate was flooded with light. Thousands of floating crystals hung in the air, each glowing with a soft blue hue. They cast gentle shadows on the faces of 17 different species gathered for the annual Assembly of Worlds. Ambassador Katra of the Salvani Collective stood in the center of the hall, her silvery skin reflecting the light from the crystals above. She had 4 arms, like all her kin, and she kept 2 of them folded behind her back as a sign of respect. Her large black eyes slowly scanned the room, observing the other delegates as they spoke and laughed. 3,000 years. That was how long the Galactic Conglomerate had maintained peace among the stars. 3,000 years of trade, cooperation, and the exchange of knowledge. Katra was proud to be part of such a great alliance. Her people, the Salvani, had been members for nearly 2,000 of those years. They were respected, trusted, and had helped build this civilization. Ambassador Katra, said a deep voice behind her. She turned to see High Commander Vorsh of the Martin Empire. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, with thick gray skin covered in natural armor plating. His species had evolved in a high-gravity world, and they were among the strongest beings in the known galaxy. You seem lost in thought. I was thinking about history, Kra replied, about how far we have all come. Vorsh made a sound that might have been a laugh. History is for scholars and children. I prefer to think about the future. The future grows from the past, Katra said. We cannot understand where we are going if we do not remember where we came from. Perhaps, Vorsh looked around the great hall with obvious pride, but what matters is that we are here now. 17 species of the conglomerate, united and strong. Nothing in this galaxy can threaten us. Katra nodded, but something small and cold stirred in her mind. Memories. A story her grandmother had told her when she was a child. A story about another species that was not in this room, one who would never be here. Humans. She brushed the thought aside. Humans were gone. They had not existed for thousands of years. They were nothing, merely dust in memory. Now, far from the Great Hall, in a small office on a research station orbiting a dead star, a Salvani scientist named Rilken was studying old data, very old data, the kind of data that most people had forgotten existed. Rilken was not like other scientists. He was not interested in new discoveries or famous awards. He was interested in the past. He spent his days combing through ancient files and forgotten archives. He believed that the past held secrets that could change everything. Today, he was reviewing records from the early days of space exploration, records from the time before the formation of the conglomerate, records from when the galaxy was wild and dangerous. His 4 eyes slid rapidly across the screen in front of him. Most of the data was corrupted. Time had damaged the storage systems, but here and there, he could make out words and images. One file caught his attention. It was labeled simply, Observation Report Sol 3, Final. Sol 3, that was the old name for the human homeworld, the planet they called Earth. Rilken opened the file. His heart began to beat faster as he read. The report was written by a Salvani observation group that had been monitoring Earth from a hidden station on the edge of the human solar system. It was dated 4,327 years ago. Day 1,247 of observation. The humans continue to develop at an alarming rate. In less than 300 years, they have moved from simple chemical rockets to prototypes of faster-than-light engines. This is unprecedented. No species in our records has ever developed so quickly. Rilken scrolled down. His eyes widened. Day 1,312. The humans have discovered our observation station. We do not know how. Our stealth technology should be far beyond their detection capabilities. They have sent radio signals in our direction. The signals contain mathematical sequences. They are trying to communicate. Day 1,340. The Conglomerate Council has decided not to respond to human signals. Humans are considered too dangerous for contact. Their history is filled with violence. They are constantly at war with one another. The Council believes they will soon destroy themselves, like all such species. Day 1,406. Humans have launched their first interstellar probes. The probes are primitive but functional. At their current rate of development, humans may reach true interstellar travel within 200 years. Day 1,520. Emergency report. A war has broken out on Earth. Humans are using nuclear weapons against one another. The destruction is immense. Cities are burning. The atmosphere is filling with radiation and ash. The Council's prediction seems correct. The humans are destroying themselves. Rilken froze. He had heard this part of history before. Everyone had. Humans burned their own world. They killed themselves in the Great War. It was a tragedy, yes, but also a lesson, a warning of what happens to species that cannot control their own violent nature. But the report continued. Day 1534. Something unexpected has occurred. In the final days before the total collapse, the humans launched a fleet of ships. We counted 47 vessels of various sizes. The ships are heading away from Earth at high speed toward the outer edge of the galaxy. They are using a form of faster-than-light travel we have never seen before. We attempted to track them, but they vanished beyond our sensor range. Day 1535. Final report. Earth is dead. The atmosphere is toxic. The surface is covered in radiation. No human life remains on the planet. However, we must note for the record that not all humans perished with their world. An unknown number escaped on the fleet we observed. The Council has decided that these survivors are of no concern. They were heading into empty space, far from any inhabited worlds. They will perish in the void. This observation mission is now complete. Let the humans serve as a lesson to all who come after. Rilken leaned back in his chair. His hearts were thumping. His hands were trembling. 47 ships. 47 ships full of humans had fled Earth before it perished. And the conglomerate simply decided not to follow them, not to check on them, not to help them, not to observe them, and not even to think of them again. For 4,000 years, everyone believed humans were extinct. But what if they were wrong? Ambassador Katra returned to her private quarters after the assembly. She was tired. Diplomacy was exhausting work. She wanted only to sleep for many hours, but when she entered her rooms, she found a message waiting for her. It was marked urgent and classified. It had come from the science department. She opened it with a frown. Ambassador, the message read, I apologize for the intrusion at this hour. My name is Rilken. I am a researcher specializing in historical archives. I have discovered something that I believe you need to see immediately. It concerns humans. Katra felt that cold sensation again, the one she had felt in the Great Hall, the one that reminded her of old stories and dark warnings. She sent a reply, Come to my quarters immediately. Rilken arrived within the hour. He was young, Katra noted. His silvery skin still held the bright sheen of youth. His eyes were wide with a mix of fear and excitement. Tell me what you found, Katra said. Rilken showed her the old observation report. He explained what it meant. He told her about the 47 ships and the unknown form of faster-than-light travel. He told her about the 4,000 years of silence. That is interesting, Kra said slowly, but it changes nothing. Even if some humans survived, they fled into empty space. There is nothing there. No planets, no resources, no hope. They would have died within a generation. I thought so too, said Rilken, but then I found this. He opened another file. This one was much more recent. It was a report from only 3 days ago. A deep space probe went silent near the Carina dwarf galaxy, Rilken explained. The science department assumed it was a malfunction. Probes are constantly failing in deep space, but I looked at the data it sent before it went silent. He showed Katra an image. It was blurry and distorted, but she could make out the shape. A ship. An enormous ship, larger than anything ever built by the conglomerate. And on its hull, barely visible, was a symbol, a blue circle with green and brown spots. I matched this symbol with our historical archives, Rilken said. His voice was barely a whisper. It matches images from Earth. This is how humans represented their planet. Katra stared at the image. Her mind refused to accept what she was seeing. It was impossible. It should have been impossible. There is more, Rilken continued. 2 more probes went silent in the same region. And yesterday, we lost contact with a research vessel that was sent to investigate. We lost contact. It simply vanished. No distress signal, no explanation. One moment, it was there, and the next, it was gone. Kra stood very still. The cold feeling now spread through her entire body. This was no longer just a whisper of unease. It was fear. True, deep fear. We must tell the Council, she said. I agree. But Ambassador Rilken hesitated. What do we tell them? That humans might still be alive? That they could have been out there for 4,000 years, building, evolving, and remembering? Kra thought about the stories her grandmother used to tell her, stories about humans and their strange nature. They were short-lived creatures, her grandmother had said. They lived only about 8,100 years. But in that short time, they burned with an intensity that no other species could match. They loved deeply. They hated deeply. They never forgot kindness, and they never forgot evil. "We will tell them the truth," Katra said. "We will tell them that we may have made a terrible mistake. We watched as humans burned their own world and did nothing to help them. We knew that some of them survived, and we chose to ignore them. We assumed they would die in the darkness between the stars." She looked again at the image of the massive ship, the ship that was larger than anything the conglomerate had ever built. "If they are still alive," she said quietly, "then they have had 4,000 years to remember what we did. 4,000 years to grow strong. 4,000 years to plan. What do you think they want?" Rilken asked. Katra did not answer for a long time. She thought about her grandmother's stories. She thought about human history, full of war and violence, but also full of art, music, and love. She thought about how the conglomerate had treated them, how they had watched, studied, and eventually abandoned them. "I do not know what they want," she finally said, "but I know one thing. Whatever they have become out there in the dark, we helped create it. And now, we will have to face it." 3 days later, the conglomerate council gathered for an emergency meeting. The great hall, which had been full of light and celebration, was now dark and tense. The floating crystals were dimmed. Delegates sat in their seats with fear on their faces. High Commander Vorsh stood in the center of the hall. His voice echoed against the ancient walls. "The science department has confirmed our worst fears," he said. "Contact has been lost with 7 probes, 2 research vessels, and 1 military reconnaissance ship in the Bliss region of the Carina Dwarf Galaxy. Before each disappearance, our sensors detected the presence of unknown vessels, vessels of immense size, vessels bearing the symbol of the human homeworld." A wave of whispers swept through the hall. Vorsh raised a hand, calling for silence. "We do not know how many ships they have. We do not know what weapons they possess. We do not know their intentions, but we know one thing for certain." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The humans are not extinct. They have survived, and they are coming." The whispers turned into screams. Delegates jumped to their feet, interrupting each other in panic. Some demanded immediate military action, others called for diplomacy. A few suggested fleeing, hiding in the far corners of the galaxy. Ambassador Kra sat quietly, listening to it all. She watched as her colleagues argued in a panic, and she felt a strange calm. It was their own doing. She knew them all. Salvani Martins, all the species of the conglomerate. They had watched as humans struggled and suffered, and they decided to do nothing. They assumed the humans would simply vanish, like so many other species before them. But humans were not like other species. Her grandmother had told her that long ago. Humans did not give up. Humans did not vanish. Humans survived. And now, after 4,000 years of silence, they were returning. Katra looked up at the darkened crystals overhead. She thought about the future that Vorsh had once been so certain of, a future of 17 species, united and strong. That future was now over. A new future was beginning. And Katra suspected it would not be written by the conglomerate, but by the species they had left to die among the stars. Humans were no longer a myth. They were real, and they remembered everything. Commander Julft had served in the 3rd Research Fleet of the conglomerate for over 200 years. During that time, she had seen much. She had watched stars being born in massive clouds of fire and gas. She had walked on worlds where the ground was made of crystal and the sky burned with 3 suns. She had met creatures that lived in the vacuum of space, floating in the void like living ships. But she had never been afraid not. Her ship, the Vigilance, was the largest vessel in the 3rd Fleet. It carried a crew of 8,000 and enough weaponry to destroy a small moon. For 2 centuries, that had been more than enough to handle any threat they encountered. Now, looking at the image on her command screen, Julft felt as if she were commanding a child's toy. The ship floating before them was beyond anything she had ever seen. It was black, black as the space around it, and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its shape did not resemble any conglomerate design. It was long and angular, with sharp edges that reminded Julft of a predator's teeth. Weapon ports lined its hull in rows that stretched on and on, more firepower on one ship than in her entire fleet combined. And it was not alone. From the darkness behind the first ship, new shapes were emerging, dozens of them, then hundreds, then thousands. They kept arriving, an endless wave of black vessels appearing out of nowhere like ghosts materializing from the shadows. "Commander," said her sensor officer. His voice was trembling. I am. I am counting more than 12,000 ships, and more are arriving. 12,000 ships. The entire military fleet of the conglomerate, gathered from all 17 species, consisted of about 1,500 vessels. These humans, these beings who were supposed to be dead, had built an armada that could match the combined might of the galaxy. After 4,000 years of silence, Jolft gripped the armrests of her command chair. Her 3 hearts were pounding so hard she could hear them in her ears. She had to do something. She had to say something. Her crew was waiting for her instructions. Open a comms channel, she ordered. All frequencies. Channel open. Commander Jolft took a deep breath. She was about to speak to a species that had been dead for 4,000 years, a species her own people had helped to abandon. She did not know what to say. Unknown vessels, she began. This is Commander Jolft of the Galactic Conglomerate. We come in peace. We wish to communicate. Please respond. Silence. The human ships hung in space like a wall of shadow, motionless and silent. Seconds passed, then minutes. Jolft began to wonder if they had even heard her. Then a voice came through the speakers. It spoke in a language Jolft did not recognize at first. Then her translator activated, and she heard the words in her own tongue. You forgot about us. The voice was calm. There was no anger in it, no hatred, just a simple statement of fact. That was a mistake. The message spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Every species heard it, every world received it. Humans were alive. Humans had returned, and they had not forgotten. On the Salvani homeworld, Ambassador Craw watched the recording of the human fleet over and over. She counted the ships. She studied their designs. She tried to understand what she was seeing. Humans were a young species. When they burned their world, they had only just begun to explore space. Their technology was primitive compared to the conglomerate. They should have perished in the void. They should have vanished. Instead, they became something entirely different. How is this possible? She asked Rilken, who stood beside her. How could they build all this? Rilken had been researching human history since his discovery in the archives. He had learned as much as he could about the strange species that had once lived on the 3rd planet from the star they called Sol. Humans were different from us, he said slowly. From all of us. They lived short lives, on average about 80 years, but that made them urgent. They had no time to be careful. They had no time to plan over centuries. They had to act, create, and build everything within one short life. But that should have made them weaker, not stronger. No, Ambassador, it made them desperate, and desperation combined with intelligence is a powerful force. Humans achieved in one lifetime what most species take 10 lifetimes to accomplish. They went from simple farming to nuclear energy in less than 200 years. They went from horses to spaceships in 100. Katra looked again at the image of the human fleet. 12,000 ships, probably more by now. A whole civilization built in the darkness between galaxies. They had 4,000 years, she said quietly. 4,000 years to do nothing but survive and remember. And if they evolved even with a fraction of their historical speed, Rilken did not finish. He did not have to. The implications were terrifying. On the Marton homeworld, High Commander Vorsh was not thinking about the implications. He was thinking about war. The war room was full of the greatest military minds of the Marton Empire. Generals, admirals, and strategists were all gathered around a massive holographic display that showed the current position of the human fleet. They have stopped at the edge of conglomerate space, one admiral reported. They have not advanced further. Our scouts report no aggressive movements yet, Vorsh said. His deep voice echoed through the room. They have not attacked yet, but they will. A species does not build 12,000 warships for peaceful purposes. Perhaps they want to negotiate, another general suggested. Perhaps they only want recognition of a place in the conglomerate. Vorsh slammed his fist on the table. The sound was like thunder. They want revenge, he growled. Think about what we did to them. We watched as their world burned, and we did nothing. We allowed them to fly off into the void to die alone. For 4,000 years, they have thought only about what we did to them, about what we did not do for them. He pointed at the holographic display, at the massive human ships that dwarfed everything the Martins had ever built. They did not build these ships for diplomacy, they built them for war. And if we do not strike first, while we still have the advantage in numbers, they will destroy us all. The room went silent. Every officer present knew what Vorsh was proposing. A preemptive strike, A first strike against a species that had not yet committed any hostile acts. It was dangerous. It was perhaps suicidal. But, looking at those human ships, many of them wondered, was the High Commander right? The Conglomerate Council will never approve an attack, one admiral said finally. The Salvani will block it. The Kitnari will refuse to participate. Then we will not ask the Council, Vorsh said. His eyes were hard as stone. The Martan Empire has already faced threats without the help of our so-called allies. We will do it again. Begin mobilizing the fleet. All ships. All reserves. We will strike within 30 days. News of the Martan mobilization spread quickly through conglomerate space. It was supposed to be secret, but there were too many ships, too many soldiers, too many supply lines to keep it completely hidden. Ambassador Kra found out through her intelligence network. After reading the report, she felt a cold horror settle in her stomach. Fools, she whispered. Absolute fools. She immediately contacted the Kitnari. The Kitnari were the oldest of the spacefaring species, the founders of the conglomerate itself. They were wise and patient, and they understood things that younger species did not. The Kitnari elder who appeared on her screen was ancient beyond measure. His skin was like old paper, thin and pale, covered with patterns of dark spots. His eyes glowed with a soft, inner light. Ambassador Katra, he said. His voice was like wind passing through dry leaves. I was expecting your call. Elder, you must stop the Martans. If they attack the humans without provocation, it could mean the end of everything. The end of the conglomerate. Perhaps the end of us all. The elder was silent for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was very soft. I cannot stop the Martans, Ambassador. They are afraid, and fear makes creatures do foolish things. But I can tell you something that might help you understand what is happening, Teen. Anything, Elder, please. When humans first began to explore space, we watched them. All of us. We saw a species with great potential. They were creative, adaptive, and determined. In many ways, they reminded us of ourselves in our youth. Then why didn't you help them? Why did you let them destroy themselves? The elder closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked not wise, but just old. Old, tired, and sad. Because we were afraid, Ambassador. We saw their potential, yes. But we also saw their violence, their endless wars, their ability to hate each other over differences that seemed meaningless to us. We looked at humans and saw ourselves in the reflection. We saw who we could have become if we had not learned to control our dark impulses. He opened his eyes again, and Ketra saw something in them she had never seen in the Kitnari before. Shame. We convinced ourselves that they would destroy themselves, that it was inevitable, that we could do nothing. But the truth is that we were afraid of what they might become. We were afraid that they would surpass us. So we watched and waited, and when their world burned, we told ourselves it was for the best. Ketra felt tears well up in her eyes. She was not sure if they were tears of sadness or tears of fear. What do we do, Elder? How do we fix this? The Kitnari elder was silent for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his words were weighted with 4,000 years of regret. I do not know if it can be fixed, Ambassador. Some mistakes are too great, some grudges too deep. But I will tell you this. The Martans plan to attack because they believe humans are monsters. They believe the only way to survive is to destroy the humans before the humans destroy them. And what do you believe? I believe that humans are not monsters. Not yet. They have had 4,000 years to become monsters. And they did not attack us. They did not burn our worlds and kill our people. They simply appeared. They showed us who they had become. They reminded us that they exist. They want us to know that they are there. Yes, they want us to know. They want us to remember. And they want us to understand that we can no longer ignore them. Ketra thought about this. She thought about the message the humans had sent. You forgot about us. That was a mistake. It wasn't a threat. She realized that now. It was a statement, a declaration, a way of saying, we are still here. We survived. We matter. What happens if the Martans attack? She asked. The elder's eyes darkened. Then we find out if the humans became monsters in the end. And I fear that we will not like the answer. 23 days passed. After the first contact, Commander Julft received new orders. She was to hold her position and observe. She was not to engage the human fleet. She was not to provoke them in any way. She felt a sense of relief. Her ships were still drifting in space, surrounded by the massive human armada. For 23 days, neither side moved, neither side fired. They simply observed each other across the void. Two civilizations were assessing one another. But on the 24th day, everything changed. A new wave of ships appeared on her sensors. Non-human ships, Martan ships. Thousands of them. The entire military might of the Martan Empire dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a formation that could mean only one thing. "Commander," cried her sensor officer. "The Martans are charging weapons. They are targeting the human fleet." Jolft felt her blood run cold. "Open a comms channel with the Martan flagship. Now! Channel open. High Commander Vorsh. This is Commander Jolft of the Third Fleet. Stand down. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage." Vorsh's voice sounded cold and sharp. "Step aside, Commander. This does not concern you. The Martans will handle the human threat ourselves." "You will not win this fight. Look at their ships. They surpass us in everything. We outnumber them. Numbers will win. You will doom us all." But Vorsh did not answer. On Jolft's screen, she watched as the Martan fleet opened fire. Thousands of guns fired simultaneously. The space between the fleets erupted in fire and energy. For a moment, Jolft dared to hope that, perhaps, just perhaps, Vorsh was right. Perhaps numbers would be enough. Then, the human ships began to move. They moved in ways Jolft had never seen. They were fast, incredibly fast, dancing through the fire of the Martan weapons as if it were nothing. And when they returned fire, the Martan ships exploded one by one, like stars dying in rapid succession. Humans did not miss. Every shot found its mark. Every weapon hit its target. What are they using?" Jolft whispered. Her weapons officer looked at his screen in bewilderment. "I don't know, Commander. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. It seems they are bending space itself." The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than an hour. When it was over, the Martan fleet was gone. Thousands of ships, millions of soldiers turned into floating debris in the cold of space. The human fleet had not lost a single ship, and then, slowly, the massive black ships began to turn. They oriented themselves toward conglomerate space, toward the worlds of the 17 species, toward everything that Jolft had sworn to protect. A new message came over the comms channel. The same calm voice as before. "We did not want this. Remember that. We came in peace. We were ready to talk, but you attacked us. You made your choice." A pause. Then, "Now we will make ours." The human fleet began to move forward, and Commander Jolft, helplessly drifting in the debris of Martan ambition, could do nothing but watch. The war had begun, and it had already been lost. Admiral Helena Vance stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and watched the stars. She was 63 years old. She had short-cropped gray hair and steel-colored eyes. Her face was covered in lines left by command, by decisions made, and by burdens borne. Her entire life, she had prepared for this moment. And now, the moment had arrived. Behind her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. Of course, they were all human. Every person in the fleet was human. 12,000 ships, 40 million soldiers, and countless support personnel. The largest military force in the history of their species. It had all been built with one goal: to return home. "Admiral," said her senior officer, a tall man named Marcus Chen, with dark eyes and a calm manner that Vance had relied on for years. "The conglomerate fleet has retreated behind the debris field. They are not engaging." "Good." Vance did not turn from the window. "What about the survivors?" "We have picked up 3,000 Martan escape pods. Medical teams are providing care to the wounded. Most are in stable condition. Make sure they receive the best care we can provide. They are not our enemies, Marcus. They are victims of their own leader's stupidity." "Yes, Admiral." Vance finally turned from the window. She walked to the center of the bridge, where a massive holographic display showed the current state of the galaxy. Conglomerate territory was marked in blue. The human fleet's position was marked in red, and the path they would take was marked in white, cutting through the blue like a knife through silk. "Show me Earth," she said. The display shifted, zooming in on a small yellow star on the edge of what had once been conglomerate space. Around the star revolved 8 planets. The third planet was brown and gray, scarred with ancient wounds that had never healed. Earth, the homeworld, the place from which their ancestors had fled 4,000 years ago. Vance looked at the dead world and felt something tighten in her chest. She had never seen Earth with her own eyes. No living human had. It existed only in records and memories, passed down from generation to generation like a sacred text. But she knew its history. Every human did. They taught it to her in childhood before they learned anything else. The story of how their world burned. The story of how the conglomerate watched it. The story of how 47 ships fled into the void, carrying the last hope of humanity. Those ships traveled for centuries. Overcoming distances that should have been impossible, they found a new home in a distant galaxy, a harsh world that demanded everything from them just to survive. They built, they fought, and they almost died hundreds of times. But they survived, and having survived, they became strong. The voice of Admiral Chen interrupted her thoughts. "We are receiving a transmission from the Conglomerate Council. They are requesting immediate negotiations." "Of course they are requesting," Vance smiled. But there was no warmth in her smile. "They saw what we did to the Marton fleet. Now they want to talk. Should I refuse the transmission?" Vance thought for a moment. Part of her wanted to say yes. Part of her wanted to simply ignore the conglomerate's requests and continue moving forward, carving a path of destruction through their precious civilization. But that was not why they had come. That was not what the founders had wanted. That was not what it meant to be human. "No," she said finally. "Accept the transmission. Let them say what they want to say. It is time for them to understand who we are and what we want." The transmission came through a private channel and was projected onto the main display of the bridge. Vance saw a room full of alien faces. Some she recognized from historical records. The silver-skinned Salvani, the massive Martans, the ancient Kitnari. All 17 species of the conglomerate were gathered together in what was clearly an emergency session. "Admiral Vance," said one of the Salvani. Her voice was carefully controlled, but Vance heard the fear beneath it. "I am Ketra, from the Salvani Collective. On behalf of the Galactic Conglomerate, I want to express my deepest regret regarding the actions of the Marton Empire. Their attack was unauthorized and does not reflect the will of the Council." "That may be true," Vance replied. "But the Martons were members of your conglomerate. Their ships flew under your banner. Their attack was made possible by their alliance with you. You cannot simply disown them now that it is convenient." The Marton representative, a large male with gray armor plating and angry eyes, stepped forward. "We acted to protect the conglomerate from your aggression. You appear out of nowhere with a massive fleet, and we are supposed to just accept it. You are the aggressor here, human." Vance stared at him for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but filled with something that made the Marton step back. "Aggression. Let me tell you about aggression. 4,000 years ago, your kind watched as our world died. You watched as our cities burned, our families died, our entire civilization collapsed, turning into ash and radiation. And while that was happening, your conglomerate did nothing. You watched from your hidden stations. You recorded everything, and then you flew away, certain that we would simply vanish." She walked closer to the display. Her eyes were locked on the faces of the aliens before her. "We appealed to you. We sent messages, trying to establish contact, trying to join your civilization. We did not want war, we wanted peace. We wanted to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And you ignored us. You decided that we were too dangerous, too cruel, too primitive. You decided to let us die." "That was 4,000 years ago," the Marton protested. "None of us were alive then. We cannot be held responsible for the decisions of our ancestors." "Neither can we," Vance replied. "But we all live with the consequences of those decisions, don't we?" The hall fell silent. Vance let the silence stretch. Let them feel its weight. "When our ancestors fled Earth," she continued, "they took with them everything they could save: records, artifacts, knowledge, genetic samples. They knew they would likely perish in the void. They knew the odds were against them, but they refused to simply give up and accept extinction." She smiled slightly, this time a genuine smile. "That is what it means to be human. We do not give up. We do not surrender. We do not go quietly into the dark. And we do not forget." The negotiations went on for several hours. Vance listened as various representatives of the conglomerate put forward their arguments, their pleas, their demands. Some were arrogant, insisting that humans had no right to enter conglomerate space. Some were apologetic, begging for forgiveness for mistakes made thousands of years ago. Some were calculating, trying to figure out what humans wanted so they could offer it in exchange for peace. But it was the Kitnari elder who finally asked the right question. "Admiral Vance," he said. His ancient voice cut through the noise of the other delegates. "You have shown us your power. You have proven that you could have destroyed us if you had wanted to. But you did not. You came this far and stopped. You took prisoners instead of killing them. You gave us a chance to talk instead of simply destroying us." He paused. His glowing eyes were locked on hers. Why? What is it that you actually want? Vance met his gaze. In that moment, she felt a connection with this ancient creature, a recognition of something shared. He understood, she realized. He was perhaps the only one among them who truly understood. What do we want? She repeated. We want to get our home back. A confused murmur rippled through the hall. Ambassador Catra leaned forward. Your home? You mean Earth? But Earth is dead. It has been dead for 4,000 years. The atmosphere is toxic. The surface is covered in radiation. Nothing can live there. Nothing can live there yet, Vance corrected. But we have spent 4,000 years developing technologies that your conglomerate cannot even imagine. We have terraforming capabilities that can heal a dead world. We have atmospheric processors that can cleanse the most severe pollution. We have radiation scrubbers that can make the deadliest ground safe again. She projected a new image onto the display. It showed Earth, but not the brown and gray Earth of the present. It showed Earth as it was 4,000 years ago, before the war. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling over a living world. This is what we want, she said. We want to go home. We want to heal our world. We want to restore what was lost. And in return, the Kitnari elder asked, in return, you will leave us alone. Earth and its solar system will now be human territory, forever. You will remove all presence from our space. You will return all artifacts taken from our world, and you will officially acknowledge what your ancestors did to us. The Martin representative laughed harshly. You destroyed our fleet. You killed millions of our warriors, and now you want us to apologize to you. Vance turned her cold eyes toward him. Your fleet attacked us without provocation. Your warriors fired the first shots. We defended ourselves. If anyone should be apologizing, it is you. She is right, Catra said quietly. The Martin turned to her in shock, but she continued. The Martins attacked without authorization. They started this conflict. We cannot blame the humans for defending themselves. Thank you, Ambassador, Vance said. But I am not seeking blame. I am not seeking revenge. I am seeking justice. Simple, straightforward justice. She looked around the hall at all the alien faces, all the species that had left her ancestors to die in the dark. 4,000 years ago, you made a choice. You decided to ignore us. You decided to let us burn. You told yourselves that we would simply vanish, that the galaxy would be better off without us. We were wrong, said the Kitnari elder. Yes, you were wrong. But we did not come here to punish you for that mistake. We did not come here to conquer or destroy. We are here because we survived. We are here because we remember. And we are here because, despite everything you did to us, we still believe in something better. After the official negotiations ended, Vance remained on the bridge alone. She had asked Chen to give her time to think. The next few hours would determine the fate of billions of lives. She had to be sure she was making the right decisions. She walked to the window and looked at the stars again. Somewhere out there, light years away in the void, was her true home, New Terra. That was what they called it. The world their ancestors had found and made their own. Vance was born on New Terra. She grew up in its cities, walked through its forests, swam in its oceans. It was a beautiful world in its own harsh way. The founders had chosen well, but it was not Earth. Every human child learned about Earth. They learned about its blue skies and green hills. They learned about its animals and plants, most of which now existed only as genetic samples in carefully maintained vaults. They learned about its history, its cultures, its art, music, and literature. They learned about what had been lost, and they learned about what had been done to them. Vance remembered her grandmother telling her stories about the flight from Earth. Her grandmother had been a child during the Exodus, one of the youngest survivors. She had looked through the viewport as Earth became smaller and smaller behind them. A tiny blue dot, disappearing into the darkness. We never stopped loving it, her grandmother had said. Even when it was gone, even when we knew we could never go back, Earth was home. It always will be. Now, for the first time in 4,000 years, they could return. They had the power to heal their world, to restore what had been destroyed. They had the power to make the conglomerate respect them, but they also had to make a choice. They could use their power for revenge. They could burn the conglomerate worlds just as their own world had been burned. They could make the galaxy pay for what it had done to humanity. Or they could use their power for something else, something better. Vance thought again about her grandmother. She thought about the stories, the memories, the hopes, and dreams that had been passed down from generation to generation of humans in exile. "We did not survive just to become monsters," her grandmother had said. "We survived to prove that we are better than they thought, better than violence, better than hatred, better than fear." Vance closed her eyes. She thought about the Martan prisoners in the medical bay being treated by human doctors. She thought about the conglomerate representatives arguing, pleading, and trying to understand. She thought about all the billions of creatures across the galaxy who were now waiting to learn their fate. They expected monsters. They expected revenge. They expected humans to be exactly what the ancient conquerors had feared. But that was not who they were. That was not who they would ever be. Vance opened her eyes and turned to the command console. She had to make a decision, and now she knew what that decision would be. They would take Earth back, they would heal their world, they would restore their civilization, but they would not destroy the conglomerate. They would not burn innocent worlds. They would not prove that the ancient fears were true. They would show the galaxy what humanity truly was. Not monsters, not conquerors, not destroyers. Survivors, builders, dreamers, and perhaps, in time, friends. The official agreement was signed 3 days later. The conglomerate agreed to all of humanity's conditions. Earth and its solar system were recognized as human territory. All conglomerate presence would be removed. All artifacts would be returned. An official statement of regret would be published, acknowledging the mistakes of the past. In return, humanity agreed to peace. They would not attack conglomerate worlds. They would not interfere in conglomerate affairs. They would coexist separately but peacefully until both sides were ready to meet as equals. It was not perfect. There were those on both sides who wanted more. Martin hardliners demanded revenge for their destroyed fleet. Human extremists argued that the conglomerate should suffer for its crimes. But the agreement held, and slowly, uncertainly, the galaxy began to adjust to a new reality. Humanity was no longer a myth. Humanity was no longer a memory. Humanity was real, powerful, and here to stay. And Admiral Helena Vance, standing on the bridge of the Remembrance as her fleet began the long journey to Earth, allowed herself a small smile. They were going home. The negotiations were over, but the real work was just beginning. Ambassador Cross stood on the observation deck of her diplomatic vessel and watched the human fleet pass by, ship after ship. An endless parade of black hulls and glittering weapons, all heading to the dead world called Earth. She had volunteered for this mission when the Conglomerate Council asked for representatives to accompany the human fleet and observe their restoration work. Keitra was the first to volunteer. Some called her brave, others called her foolish. She called herself curious. She wanted to understand these beings. She wanted to know how they had survived, how they had become so powerful, how they had kept their hope alive through 4,000 years of exile. Most of all, she wanted to know why they had chosen mercy instead of revenge. "Ambassador," a voice sounded behind her. She turned and saw a human woman standing in the doorway. The woman was tall and thin, with brown skin and hair tied back in a tight braid. She wore the gray uniform of human military with several medals on her chest. "Captain Torres," Keitra said. "Thank you for meeting with me." Captain Alina Torres nodded and walked over to stand beside her at the window. For a moment, they both watched the fleet in silence. "You asked to learn about us," Torres finally said. "About our history, our path. I have been assigned to answer your questions. I appreciate that. I have many questions. I assume so." Torres' voice was neutral, but Croc caught a hint of bitterness in it. "Ask whatever you want. I will answer honestly." Croc carefully considered her first question. There was so much she wanted to know, but one question burned brighter than all the rest. "How did you survive?" she asked. "Our records say that 47 ships left Earth. That is few. The journey to the Carina dwarf galaxy must have taken centuries. How did you not perish along the way?" Torres was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was soft, filled with memories that were not her own, but which she had inherited from those who came before her. "It wasn't easy," she said. "The early years were the hardest. The founders planned as best they could. But space is cruel. Equipment broke, resources ran out, diseases spread through the cramped ships. Many died." She stopped, looking at the fleet around them. Of the 47 ships that left Earth, only 23 made it to the Carina dwarf galaxy. And of those 23, only 11 were in good enough condition to land on the planet we named New Terra. "So much was lost," Katra whispered. "Yes, but enough survived. Enough to build the first shelters, plant the first crops, Start the first families. Enough to remember. Remember what? Torres turned and looked at her directly. Her dark eyes were intense. They burned with a fire that Kra did not fully understand. We remembered everything. The cities we lost, the families we buried, the world we were forced to leave behind, and we remembered who was to blame. Kra felt a chill run through her. The conglomerate. The conglomerate watched as our world burned and did nothing. The conglomerate recorded our extinction and flew away. The conglomerate convinced itself that we deserved what happened to us, that we were too cruel, too primitive, too dangerous to live. Torres turned back to the window. We never forgot that. Every generation, we passed down that story. Every child learned about Earth. Every adult took an oath to remember. We built our entire civilization around that memory and around revenge. Torres slowly shook her head. No, that's what the Martins thought. That's what they expected, but they were wrong. Over the next few weeks, Kra learned more about human history than any conglomerate being ever had. Captain Torres became her guide, walked her through the fleet's archives, introduced her to historians and teachers, and showed her records and documents that had been kept for 4,000 years. She learned about the early years on New Terra, when survival was uncertain and death was always near. Humans faced challenges that would have broken most species. The planet was harsh, with extreme temperatures and dangerous wildlife. Resources were scarce, the population was small, but humans adapted. That is our greatest strength, Torres explained during one of their sessions. We can change, we can learn, we can become whatever we need to be to survive. She showed Kitra images of the first settlements on New Terra. Small domes of metal and plastic clinging to the rocky soil like desperate fingers. Then, an image from 100 years later. Larger buildings, better materials, the beginning of infrastructure. Then images from 1,000 years later. Cities stretching to the horizon, factories producing wonders of engineering. A civilization that had grown from nothing into something magnificent. But you didn't just survive, Kitra said. You thrived. You built a fleet that surpasses anything the conglomerate ever created. Torres smiled slightly. It was the first time Kitra had seen her smile. Because we had to. We knew that someday we would return to Earth. We knew that when we did, the conglomerate would be waiting for us. They would see us as a threat again, just like before. They would try to destroy us again. So you built an army, we built a deterrent. We built enough strength that no one would dare to attack us. We built enough power that we could demand respect instead of begging for it. She brought up an image on the display. It showed a massive shipyard, larger than anything Katra had ever seen, with hundreds of ships in various stages of construction. This is the Forge, Torres said. It is the largest construction facility in human space. Every ship in our fleet was built there. Every weapon, every engine, every armor plate. How long did it take to build all this? 3,000 years. That's how long the official construction program lasted. But the planning began much earlier. The founders began designing these ships before they even landed on New Terra. They knew what they would need. They knew what they were building toward. Katras stared at the image in amazement. 3,000 years of work, all directed toward one goal. Such dedication was almost incomprehensible. And all this for revenge? No, Ambassador. The voice was firm. All this for justice. There is a difference. As the fleet approached Earth, Kra asked for permission to speak with Admiral Vance. She wanted to understand the human leader, to learn what drove her, what she hoped to achieve. Vance agreed to meet. They sat together in the Admiral's private quarters, in a simple room with minimal decoration. The only personal items Kra could see were a few photographs on the wall, depicting people she did not recognize. My family, Vance explained, noticing Kra looking. My parents. My grandparents. My great-grandparents. We keep records of our ancestors. It helps us remember where we came from. That is a beautiful tradition. It is necessary. Memory is everything to us. Without memory, we would lose ourselves. Kra slowly nodded. She was starting to understand. She thought humans were not driven by hatred or rage. They were driven by memory, by love, by a desperate need to honor those who had come before them. Admiral, she said, may I ask you a personal question? You may ask, but I cannot promise to answer. Why did you choose peace? When the Martins attacked, you had full justification for retaliation. You could have destroyed them completely. Instead, you showed mercy. Why? Vance was silent for a moment. Her eyes slid to the photographs on the wall, to the faces of her ancestors looking back at her. My grandmother once told me a story, she finally said, about the day they left Earth. She was still a child, barely old enough to understand what was happening. But she remembered standing at the viewport of her ship, watching her world burn behind her. She fell silent. Her voice grew thick with emotion. She told me she was crying not from fear, but from grief. She saw everything she loved disappearing, her home, her friends, her entire life, all of it turning into ash. It must have been horrible. It was. But that wasn't the part of the story she wanted me to remember. The part she wanted me to remember is what happened next. Vance looked directly at Katra, and the ambassador saw something deep, old, and powerful in her eyes. When they were leaving, one of the other children on the ship said he hoped the aliens would suffer as they had suffered. He said he wanted revenge. He wanted to make them pay. And your grandmother? My grandmother said, no. She said what the aliens did was wrong, but becoming like them would be even worse. She said that humans had to be better. They had to remember not just the pain but the hope, not just the loss but the love, not just what was taken from them, but what they still had. Vance's voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. She told me that being human means choosing to be kind, even when kindness is difficult. It means choosing to be merciful, even when mercy is not deserved. It means believing that the future can be better than the past, no matter how dark the present seems. That is a remarkable philosophy. It is the only reason we survived, Vance said simply. If our ancestors had given in to hatred, they would have destroyed themselves. They would have become exactly what the conglomerate feared. Instead, they chose hope. They chose love. They chose to be human. She stood and walked to the window, looking at the stars. When the Martins attacked us, I felt the same anger that child felt 4,000 years ago. I wanted to destroy them. I wanted to make them suffer. But then I remembered my grandmother's story. I remembered what it means to be human. So you showed mercy. So I showed mercy not because they deserved it, but because we deserved it. We deserved to be the humans our ancestors dreamed of. 3 days later, the fleet arrived at Earth. Katra stood on the observation deck of her ship, surrounded by human officers who had gathered to witness the moment. Captain Torres stood nearby, silent and motionless. Her eyes were locked on the view screen. Earth filled the display. It was brown and gray, covered in scars that had not healed even after 4,000 years. The atmosphere was thick with dust and poison. The oceans had vanished, turned into dry basins of salt and sand. The continents were barren, devoid of any life. It was the most heartbreaking sight Kra had ever seen. But the humans did not cry, they did not scream, and they did not turn away. They just watched. Their faces were full of determination. "It is ugly now," Torres said quietly. "But it will be beautiful again. You will see." The fleet dispersed around the planet, forming a defensive ring that stretched from horizon to horizon. Then, the work began. Massive ships descended to the surface, carrying equipment that Katra did not recognize. Other ships entered orbit, deploying devices that began to pulse with strange energy. Still, others headed to the edges of the solar system, beginning the process of gathering resources for the long restoration ahead. "What are they doing?" Katra asked. "Healing," Torres replied. "Phase 1 is atmospheric restoration. We will seed the atmosphere with microorganisms that will turn toxins into breathable air. It will take about 50 years. 50 years. That was fast for terraforming on such a scale. The next phase is the restoration of the oceans. We will redirect comets to bring water back to the planet. That will take another 100 years. Then soil restoration, biological reintroduction, climate stabilization. In total, it will take about 500 years to make Earth habitable again. 500 years. It was nothing compared to the 4,000 years the humans had already waited. It was nothing compared to the infinite patience they had shown. "You will not live to see it completed," Katra said. "No one working now would live to see it." Torres smiled. It was a sad smile, but also a proud one. "No, we won't. But our children will, and their children after them. That is what it means to be human. We plant trees whose shade we will never sit in. We build cathedrals in which we will never pray. We dream dreams that take generations to realize." She looked at Earth, at the dead world that would one day live again. "We do it because it matters, because hope matters, because the future matters, even if we never see it." Katra felt tears well up in her eyes. She had come here expecting to find monsters. She had expected anger, hatred, and violence. Instead, she found something entirely different. She found a species that had been broken and decided to rebuild. a species that had been abandoned and decided to forgive. A species that had been given every reason to become cruel and that, despite everything, decided to remain kind. She found humans, and in that moment, watching them begin the long work of healing their scarred world, she understood something important. The conglomerate was wrong about them. They were wrong from the very beginning. Humans were not monsters to be feared. They were miracles to be admired. 500 years flew by like water cascading down a mountain. First slowly, then faster, then rushing toward an inevitable conclusion. Ambassador Kra did not live to see the completion of Earth's restoration. Neither did Captain Torres, nor Admiral Vance, nor any of those who were present at the beginning. They passed away naturally, leaving behind children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who continued their work. But their legacy lived on. And on the day the restoration of Earth was finally declared complete, their names were spoken with reverence by those who had inherited their dreams. The ceremony took place in a valley that had once been called the Great Rift. 500 years ago, it was a barren scar on a dying world. Now, it was green and alive, filled with trees and flowers, the sound of running water. Birds flew overhead, their songs mixing with the wind in the branches. Admiral Chen stood in the center of the gathering, surrounded by thousands of humans and hundreds of alien observers. She was the great-great-great-granddaughter of Marcus Chen, who had served as senior officer to Admiral Vance during the return to Earth. Like her ancestor, she had dedicated her life to the dream of restoration. "Today," she said, her voice amplified across the valley, "we celebrate a dream that took 4,500 years to realize. 4,000 years of exile, 500 years of healing, and now finally we are home." A loud cheer went up from the crowd. People embraced, tears streaming down their faces. Alien observers watched with respectful silence, understanding the scale of what they were witnessing. "But this celebration is not just for us," Admiral Chen continued. "It is for everyone who came before us. For the founders who refused to give up, for the builders who worked without hope of seeing the fruits of their labor, for the dreamers who believed this day would come, even when all the evidence said otherwise." She stopped, looking over the valley around her. Green hills, blue sky, a living world that had been dead for so long. And this is for those who helped us on this journey. Our friends in the conglomerate, who found the courage to acknowledge the mistakes of their ancestors and make amends. Our research partners who joined us in building a better future. Our fellows in this vast galaxy who taught us that forgiveness is possible and reconciliation is real. In the crowd, a silver-skinned figure stood apart from the others. She was young, barely 50 years old by Salvani standards, but she carried herself with the dignity of someone much older. Her name was Cathral, and she was a direct descendant of the ambassador who first made contact with humanity 5 centuries ago. She had inherited the journals and records of her ancestor. She knew the full story of what had happened in those early days of contact. She knew about her ancestor's fears and hopes, her doubts and discoveries. And she knew about the friendship that had formed between Ambassador Kra and Captain Torres, a friendship that had laid the foundation for everything that followed. When the official ceremony ended, Cathral made her way through the crowd to Admiral Chen. The human leader noticed her approach and smiled warmly. "Ambassador Cathral," she said, "I am glad you were able to be here." "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," Cathral replied. "My ancestor would have wanted to see this day. Since she cannot, I am here in her place. She would have been proud." "Yes, I think she would have." They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the celebration continue around them. Humans and aliens mixed freely, sharing food, drink, and laughter. It was a sight that would have been unimaginable 5 centuries ago. "You know what my ancestor wrote in her final journal entry?" Cathral asked. "No, she wrote that meeting humans changed her understanding of the universe. She had always believed that species were defined by their past, shaped by their history in a way that could never be changed. But humans showed her something else. They showed her that creatures can choose their future, regardless of what their past was." Admiral Chen slowly nodded. "That is a profound insight." She also wrote that she hoped future generations would learn from humans, not how to build ships or weapons, but how to build hope, how to keep faith across centuries, how to believe in something bigger than themselves. "And they have learned." Cathral smiled. "Some have learned, not all, but some. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is how change happens, not all at once, but slowly, one creature at a time." In the years that followed the restoration ceremony, the galaxy continued to evolve. Old rivalries faded. New friendships were formed. The 17 species of the original conglomerate expanded to include others, eventually including humanity. The decision was not easy. Many humans remembered the old wounds too clearly. They did not want to join an organization that had abandoned their ancestors. They argued that humanity should remain on the sidelines, proud and independent. But others argued otherwise. They said that the past could not be changed, but the future could be shaped. They said that joining the conglomerate was not a surrender, but an opportunity. They said humanity could be a force for good in the alliance, helping to ensure that what happened to them never happened to anyone else. In the end, the second argument won. Humanity joined the Galactic Conglomerate, not as a junior member, but as an equal partner. Their ships flew side by side with Salvani and Marton vessels. Their scientists worked with Kitnari researchers. Their diplomats sat in the Great Hall, where centuries ago their existence was considered nothing more than a cautionary tale. The Martins, who had once attacked the human fleet in fear and hatred, became unexpected allies. Descendants of High Commander Vorsh publicly apologized for the actions of their ancestors, pledging eternal friendship with humanity. It was a gesture few expected, but many welcomed. "We were wrong about you," the Martin representative said during the alliance ceremony. "We thought you were monsters. We thought you would destroy everything we had built. Instead, you showed mercy when you could have shown destruction. You taught us that strength does not require cruelty. For that, we are forever grateful to you." Admiral Chen, who had become the first human representative on the Conglomerate Council, accepted the apology with grace. "We do not need your gratitude," she said. "We want your friendship. We want to build a future together where no species is abandoned and no world is left to burn. That is the only payment we need." 1,000 years after the restoration of Earth, a young girl named Sarah stood in the heart of a museum dedicated to the history of her species. She was 12 years old. She had bright eyes and an endless curiosity about the past. The museum was located in a city called New Alexandria, built on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. It was one of the oldest cities on the restored Earth, founded in the early years of the healing process. Now, it was a thriving metropolis, home to millions of humans and thousands of alien residents who had chosen Earth as their home. Sarah walked slowly through the exhibition, reading every plaque and studying every artifact. She saw images of old Earth, the Earth before the war. She saw records of the Exodus, the desperate flight into the unknown. She saw models of the first settlements on New Terra, the harsh shelters where her ancestors had fought for survival, and she saw images of the return. The massive fleet emerging from the darkness, the negotiations with the conglomerate, the 500 years of restoration work that had turned a dead world into a living one. At the end of the museum was a special exhibition. It was called the Hall of Memories, and it contained the personal effects of some of the most important figures in human history. Sarah stopped in front of one display case. Inside was an old photograph, faded and tattered with time. It showed a woman in a military uniform, standing on the bridge of a ship. She had gray hair and steel eyes. And there was something in her expression that Sarah didn't fully understand, something sad and simultaneously hopeful. "That is Admiral Helena Vance," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned and saw an elderly man with white hair and kind eyes. He was wearing the badge of a museum guide. "I know," Sarah said. She led the fleet back to Earth. She negotiated with the conglomerate. She began the restoration. "That is true, but do you know what she was best remembered for?" Sarah thought. "She showed mercy to the Martins when they attacked. She could have destroyed them, but she didn't." The old man smiled. "That is also true, but there is something else, something that isn't in most history textbooks." He sat on a bench next to the display and gestured for Sarah to join him. Admiral Vance kept a personal diary throughout her career. It was only discovered many years after her death. In that diary, she wrote about her hopes and fears, her doubts and dreams. And on the day the fleet first arrived at Earth, she wrote something that has stayed with me since I first read it. What did she write? The old man closed his eyes, reciting from memory. She wrote, "Today, for the first time, I looked at our dead world. It was broken and scarred, poisoned and lifeless. Everything my ancestors loved is gone. But standing there, looking at this scarred planet, I did not feel despair. I felt hope, because I knew that we have the power to heal it. I knew that we have the power to restore it. And I knew that someday, children who have never known exile will play in meadows where nothing had grown for 4,000 years. That is why we returned. Not for revenge, not for justice, but for them, for the children who will inherit the world we are building. For a future we will never see, but which we know in our hearts will come. Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes. She looked again at the photograph of Admiral Vance, the woman who had led her people home. "She sounds like a good person," she said. She was. She was one of the best among us, but you know what? She wasn't special. She was just a human who tried to make the right choice. And that is the most important lesson of all. What do you mean? The old man stood and pointed to the museum around them, to all the exhibits, all the artifacts, all the memories of thousands of years of human history. Every person in this museum, every hero, leader, and visionary, was just an ordinary creature who decided to perform extraordinary acts. They were afraid, but they acted anyway. They doubted, but they hoped anyway. They could have given up, but they kept going anyway. He gently placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. That is what it means to be human. It doesn't mean being perfect. It doesn't mean never making mistakes. It means choosing every day to be better than you were yesterday, to love more than you hate, to hope more than you fear, to build more than you destroy. Sarah thought about this for a long time. She thought about all the history she had learned, all the battles, triumphs, and tragedies. She thought about her own life, stretching out before her like an unwritten story. "Do you think we will keep making the right choice?" she asked. "Do you think humans will always be good?" The old man smiled. It was a wise smile, full of understanding and acceptance. "I don't know. No one knows. The future is not yet written. Every generation must make the choice for itself. But I can tell you this. For 4,000 years, when we had every reason to become monsters, we chose to remain human. When we could have destroyed our enemies, we chose to make them our friends. When we could have burned the galaxy in retaliation, we chose to heal our own world." He looked one last time at the photograph of Admiral Vance. "We made mistakes along the way. We will make them in the future. But as long as we remember who we are and what we believe in, I think we will be fine. I think we will keep choosing hope over hatred, love over fear, mercy over revenge." He turned back to Sarah and smiled. "That is what your ancestors learned in the darkness between the stars. That is what they passed on to you, and that is what you will pass on to your children, and they to theirs, and so on until the end of time." Sarah slowly nodded. Now she understood. She understood what it meant to be human. It meant carrying the memory of the past while building the hope of the future. It meant choosing every day to be worthy of those who came before them and those who would come after. It meant never forgetting and never giving up. She looked one last time at the photograph of Admiral Vance, the woman who had led her people home from the darkness. "Thank you," she whispered, though she did not know if she was speaking to the old man, or the Admiral, or all the humans who had ever lived, hoped, and dreamed. Then she turned and walked out of the museum into the bright sunshine of a world that had been dead, but now lived. The sky above her was blue, the grass beneath her feet was green. Birds sang in the trees, and children laughed in the distance. 4,500 years had passed, but they had done it. They were home. High above Earth, in the silence, the station orbited. It was an old station, one of the first built during the Restoration. Now, it served as a monument, a reminder of everything that had been lost and everything that had been gained. On the observation deck of the station, a plaque hung on the wall. On it were the words spoken by Admiral Helena Vance long ago, on the day the human fleet first arrived at their home. The inscription read, "We left Earth because we refused to become monsters. We spent 4,000 years in the darkness, building, dreaming, and hoping. We returned not for revenge, but for redemption. Not to destroy, but to heal. Not to prove we could be as cruel as the galaxy expected, but to show we could be better than anyone could have imagined. This is our home. This is our past. This is our future. We are human, and we remember everything." Below the plaque, Earth slowly orbited in the infinite darkness, blue, green, and alive. It was beautiful, it was home, and it would remain so forever.